Hello everyone and welcome to another educational webcast brought to you by the Ethical Hacker Network online magazine and sponsored by Rapid7. My name is Don and I am the editor-in-chief of the Ethical Hacker Network at ethicalhacker.net. EHNet, for short, is a free online magazine for security professionals worldwide where we have a strong emphasis on career building. In addition to great articles, a global calendar of security events, and an active and welcoming community in our forums, we are also the home of the free monthly giveaways where we literally give away thousands of dollars in prizes each and every month to top contributors. Rapid7, as luck may have it, is also the sponsor of the EHNet giveaway for this month, and it's a good one. Be sure to stay with us after the presentation for further details. Now, EHNet has collaborated with Rapid7 on multiple webcasts in the past, but those dealt more with product announcements and new features. This time, we dive deep into a specific attack and utilize Metasploit to make it happen. So for you techies out there, abusing WinRM should be lots of fun and, of course, educational. Now, most of you know of Metasploit, and that Rapid7 purchased the open source project back in 2009. But Rapid7 is actually a pretty impressive company that does much more than just pen testing software. They also are the makers of Nexpose, a vulnerability scanner, Mobilisafe for securing your mobile devices, and they also offer security services like pen testing. But above that, they also are one of the rare examples of a company that continues to support open source projects and the security community as a whole. I was actually chatting with today's presenter, David Maloney, and we were actually kind of marveling at how rare it is that a company, well, just gets it. From continuing the open source nature of Metasploit to offering free versions of their software to hiring the best talent and providing a rich environment in which to innovate, Rapid7 truly is a model for our industry. So if you get a chance at a con or even in our own EHNet community forums, have a chat with David or some of the other Metasploit team members that also contribute to EHNet on how they got hired and what being involved in the project, whether it's Metasploit or any other open source project, what it did to help their careers. Those stories are actually pretty good stuff. Also, especially the story of David Maloney himself, aka the Light Cosine, is a pretty good story. After contributing to Metasploit in his off time, he was actually approached by HD Moore directly about a job opening at Rapid7, which actually leads me to two thoughts. First is that contributing your time to the security community is not a waste of that time, as it can actually help advance your career. Secondly, talent can actually be spotted relatively easily. For people like David who put in that time to do the hard work and have the passion for what they do, success just seems to find them. And if you follow his example, success will most likely find you as well. And we're very lucky today to have his talents to showcase to you today. And if you'd like more from Cosine, check out his blog or follow him on Twitter at TheLightCosine. As a reminder, we are recording today, so yes, the video of this webcast in its entirety will be made available on EHNet. Everyone who registered will be notified by email when the video is live, and we will announce it on EHNet as well. So, what's the agenda for today? Well, as always, we try and keep it simple. In just a minute, I'll hand over the presentation to David. He'll start with a few slides, but most of his time will be spent doing live demos. He'll present for about 40 minutes. After that, we'll jump into some Q&A for about the last 10 minutes or so. If we have lots of questions, I'm more than willing to stay, as I'm sure David is, for longer than 10 minutes. If we need to go past the top of the hour, I'm totally willing, and we have done so in the past. We'll do it again this time if needed. Now, during the presentation, I will personally be monitoring the question window that you see in the GoToWebinar control panel. You should see it on the bottom right-hand side. If the dialog box is not open, then just go ahead and click the plus sign next to the word questions. That's where you can enter the questions for myself or for David, and I will gather all those questions and try not to interrupt him during the presentation, but present those questions to him afterwards in the Q&A. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. So pardon me for a second while I hand over the reins to David. And how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Don. Glad to actually be here today, and thanks for having me. Okay, can you see my screen okay? Don, you there?
There we go. I see you now.
Hello. All right, excellent. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming to the webcast here, and thanks to Don and the Ethical Hacker Network for having me. Today we're going to be talking about Windows Remote Management, or WinRM as it's known for short, and as a pen tester, what we can do with it. So just a quick note, how I got started on this whole path, I have to give credit where credit is due. I was actually put onto this by Rob Fuller, aka Mubix. Many of you probably know at least of him. And we were just sitting around at DerbyCon this year, and he started telling me about this service that he was just owning boxes with left and right. And I said, well, that sounds awesome. Why don't we have anything for it in Metasploit? So that's kind of how we got down this path, and it's funny how just a simple conversation over a beer or something can really lead you into something really cool. So without further ado, we'll go through the slides here and then get to the real meat of the hour, the live demo. So here's our quick agenda. We're going to just do a quick introduction, explain what WinRM and the Windows Remote Shell are, why we care about them, and then talk a little bit about the modules, and then show you what they can actually do. So WinRM is a HTTP SOAP listener for the WMI service. So it can listen on any HTTP port, and it just takes XML requests and responses back and forth and passes those back, excuse me, to the WMI service, which allows you to execute queries. It uses by default Kerberos and NTLM as its authentication methods, and for the purposes of Metasploit, we do everything through NTLM authentication, as we do not currently have any Kerberos support. Windows Remote Shell is sort of like a sister to WinRM. It's part of the same service, but what it does is it takes those requests and actually instantiates a command shell on the Windows machine and executes commands and returns all of the output streams back to you. And it listens on the same HTTP SOAP listener and uses, of course, the same authentication methods. So why are these things so interesting to a penetration tester? Well, I mean, the most obvious answer, of course, is that it's an additional attack vector, and we'll take any attack vector we can get. What's amazing here is that it allows you to get a lot of information and even perform arbitrary commands on a system without ever sending a payload to the box. So it gives us a lot more flexibility in our operations when WinRM is present in the environment. One of the things that's also going to be useful here, and we'll talk about this more in depth, is that this provides us an opportunity to get a shell on a box while avoiding antivirus. And this is basically going to be a new alternative to the PSExec module when WinRM is available to us. There's been a lot of talk in the community over the past year especially about how PSExec is becoming less useful because the payloads are detected by antivirus. And we're going to talk about one way you can get around that using WinRM. So the first step to abusing WinRM, or the first step in penetration testing period really, is discovery. We need to actually find WinRM in our target environment, and we need to gather a little bit of initial information about it. And so we have a auxiliary scanner module inside Metasploit called WinRM auth methods. And what this will do is it will find WinRM listeners on specific ports in the environment, and also determine what authentication schemes are supported by those WinRM listeners. You can see that screenshot there. It shows that it updates a service with the actual authentication methods. And bear in mind that we need that negotiate or NTLM protocol to be enabled in order for our modules to actually work. So once we've discovered the service, we need credentials. So just like any other service, we have a WinRM login module. And if you're familiar with any of the other brute forcers inside Metasploit, this one should be absolutely no different for you. It has all the standard options for password generation. You can enter manual username and password information. You can give it file names for word lists to use, and you just give it your target range, what port you want to listen or want to target, and just let it run. And hopefully, it's going to find some valid credentials for you. So once we have those credentials, that's when we can get really into the heart of things. And we start with the most basic technique, which is running WMI queries. For anyone who doesn't know, WMI stands for Windows Management Instrumentation, and it's a configuration management and querying interface for Windows. And it has a language similar to SQL called WQL that allows you to pretty much get any information about the configuration of that machine. The hardware, the architecture, the installed software, almost anything you can think of has a WMI interface that you can query to get information back on it. And so what we have is a simple, again, auxiliary scanner module, which means that you can simultaneously run it against multiple targets, and you supply it with an arbitrary WQL query, and it will return those results for you. In the example in the screenshot here, what we're actually querying for is the architecture of our victim machine. See if it's 32 or 64-bit. And in the example in that screenshot, we can see that it's 64-bit. This will actually be important later when we talk about our exploit module. So we said also that there is a component called Windows Remote Shell, or WinRS, which is a part of WinRM. And this works just the same way as the WMI query interface. But instead of putting WQL queries in, we put Windows command line commands in. Any command you can run from the command prompt in Windows can be executed via this module and the output returned to you. So there's a couple important things to note about WinRS. It's a stateless shell. So when you first open the shell on the target box, it spawns it up with a set time to live of about 5 minutes. It executes whatever commands that you give it, and then returns both standard out and standard error back to the module, which then displays it out to the console for you. You can potentially run into issues where you could run into a timeout with a long-running process. So if you try to run a command that's going to take more than 5 minutes, it will time out on you, and that shell will collapse. So that is something to be aware of and just kind of watch out for. So why is running commands like this important? Again, we have the concern about when we start sending payloads to machines. You run a risk of things like antivirus or even a HIPS system detecting you, blocking you, and raising all kinds of red flags. So sometimes we just want to perform 1 or 2 quick actions on our victim machine or gather a little bit more information before we try to commit to getting a shell. And so this gives us that opportunity. We can perform actions on that box without ever setting off any red flags from the antivirus world. So everybody's saying, well, that's great, Dave, but Metasploit's all about shells. We love shells. We want to get shells. That's the point of Metasploit, is to get shells. So we do have an exploit module available for the WinRM service, and it uses the credentials you've gathered much in the same way that the PS exec module does for the SMB service. Now, our WinRM module is a little different and a little unique in the way that it handles a few things. Because the exploit module actually uses the WinRS shell, we can actually do some information gathering up front and make some intelligent decisions about what we're going to do. So towards that end, we have two different exploitation techniques that we can use with this exploit. The first one utilizes PowerShell 2.0. And so when the module first runs and connects in and successfully authenticates to our victim, it runs a series of checks. First thing it checks for is if PowerShell 2.0 is installed and available on the machine. If it is, then it's going to check the script execution policy on PowerShell. By default, PowerShell has a setting that says that you cannot run a script file from the file system unless it is signed. And while that would be a bit of a problem for us, if we have administrative rights on the box, it's a simple one-line command to set that policy to unrestricted and allow us to execute any script. So the next thing the module will try to do is set that unrestricted script execution. If those both succeed, we will continue with the PowerShell 2.0 method. If it doesn't, we fall back to an older method known as the VBS command stager. And we'll talk about the specifics of how both of these work in a minute. But so the punchline here is, if possible, we go with PowerShell. And if for any reason we can't do that, we fall back to the VBS command stager, which should always be an available option. And so one of the big problems we have to overcome with this exploit is, as I mentioned before, when we spawn this shell, it has a time to live of 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the service will terminate that command shell process, which will in turn kill any of the child processes that we've spawned off. So let's take a look. PowerShell 2.0 works, the PowerShell 2.0 method, works by writing the payload in PowerShell form into a script file in a temp directory on our victim machine. In a sort of putting the meta and Metasploit way, we actually use PowerShell to write out our PowerShell script. We use the append content commandlet, which does all of our escaping and whatnot for us, making it very easy to write line by line our payload into a PowerShell script. Once we've written the script out, we execute it. Now, the PowerShell method is really great because all of the PowerShell variations of our payload, however you want to say it, are currently not flagged by any known antivirus solution. So you can go into Metasploit, generate any of our payloads in a PowerShell script, and upload it to VirusTotal. I mean, not that I recommend uploading payloads to VirusTotal, mind you, but if you were to do it, you would see that none of the vendors on there actually detect that script. There is one caveat with using the PowerShell method. You have to pick the correct architecture for your payload. So if you're targeting a 64-bit system, you must select a 64-bit payload or it will not work. And the module will actually check the architecture as once it runs into the PowerShell method. It will go in and check the architecture and see if it matches the payload that you selected, and if not, it will stop and let you know that you need to select a different payload. And again, we have the issue of that shell is going to disappear in 5 minutes. And so that means that once we've gotten our session, we need to get out of that command shell process tree as quickly as possible. That means migrating, and we need to do it quickly. Well, the old way of doing this was the migrate-f command, which is an old interpreter script. What migrate-f does is it spawns a new notepad.exe process and then migrates the interpreter shell into that process. Well, that won't work in our scenario because if we create notepad.exe from that session, it's still a child process of the command shell that's going to close and we'll still lose it. So that's where a new post module also comes into play, the Smart Migrate. Smart Migrate does quasi-intelligent migration. And what it does is it first looks to see if winlogon.exe is available on the system. Winlogon.exe is a system process, so yay, we want to get system if we can. It's very stable, and it's historically been safe to migrate into, which some system processes are not. And it should always, always, always be there. If winlogon.exe isn't there, there's something wrong on that box anyways. So first thing it'll try and do is migrate into winlogon. If for any reason it can't, whether it doesn't have permissions or something screwy has happened, it then looks at the system and looks at any explorer.exe processes that are running on that system and prioritizes the one that is in the same user context as the shell started in. So if you pass in administrator as your username when you run the module, it's going to look to see if administrator has explorer.exe running and go to that one first. Otherwise, it'll just go through and try and migrate into any explorer.exe you can find. Once we've done that migration, WinRM can shut down that command shell, and it doesn't matter. We've already escaped out of that process tree, and our shell is safe. So our exploit module is actually set by default to use this smart migrate module as its initial auto-run script option. So what if we can't do PowerShell? Whether PowerShell 2.0 is not installed, it may be PowerShell 1 is still on there, or there might not be PowerShell at all. We might not have sufficient privileges to set unrestricted script execution. That's when we fall back to the VBS command stager. The VBS command stager basically does a similar sort of thing. What it does is it writes out our payload as an exe, but it writes it to the victim file system as a base64 encoded file. Then it writes out a VB script onto the target file system, which reads in the base64 encoded file, decodes it back into a proper exe, and executes it. This is really reliable in that VB script should be there and be available on any modern Windows implementation, but we run into the age-old problem still if we're writing an exe to a file system, and that exe is likely to get popped by a modern antivirus. So it's a good fallback, but we really want to get that PowerShell method if we can. And of course, the VBS command stager, because it's executed the same way through the WinRS shell, we have the same migration issues that we have with PowerShell and the same solution. So, talked through enough slides here. Let's take a look at live demo. So, scroll over here to my MSF console, and we're going to take a look and see that we have two hosts available to us. That's not really Windows Vista, but we'll go with that. So we have two Windows machines, and if we look at the services, we can actually see, well, okay, I lied. Well, all right, let's just move on. I didn't import what I thought I imported. So let's go ahead and take a look at the WinRM auth methods discovery module. And if we look at our options, I've gone ahead and filled these in so you don't have to watch me type everything out. But we've set the rhosts option to look at IPs 151 and 152 on port 5985. Port 5985 is the default for newer implementations of WinRM for non-SSL. And it uses 5986 over SSL, and older versions use 80 and 443. So, not to put too fine a point on the basic discovery module, we'll go ahead and hit run, and we can see that we discovered WinRM is in fact listening on both of these IP addresses on that port, and both of them support the negotiate protocol. And now, if we look at services, we can see the WinRM service has been added for each of those hosts. So, we've got the services discovered. Now we need credentials. So we're going to use auxiliary scanner, WinRM, and the WinRM login module. We're going to take a look at the options here. And so I don't want to put too fine a point on this because some of you probably are already done login modules with Metasploit, but we've set it to try blank passwords. We've set our speed, what domain we're looking at. And I'm going, for the sake of speed and clarity, I've gone ahead and entered in valid credentials into the username and password fields here. Here's our target IP addresses, our port, and stop on success just says once we found a valid credential to stop trying. So we're going to go ahead and run that. And we can see that we successfully found valid credentials on both boxes. So if we look at creds, we now see those creds are saved in our database on that port with that username and password. Yippee! All right, so the sort of grunt work is now out of the way. Let's actually start doing some cool stuff. So we're going to look at another scanner module, and we're going to look at WinRM WQL. Oops. I can type, really. So here's our options for the WQL query execution module. The stuff you expect to see, the rhost, the rport, username, and password that we discovered. And then the namespace is a big one. This is a part of WMI. And most basic things that you're going to look for configuration are going to be in that roots CIM v2 namespace. There are some other namespaces out there where you can do some cool stuff. There's a really nice one for some of the newer desktop operating systems where you can actually check things like firewall status, installed antivirus, and things like that. But those only exist on desktop, and we're targeting servers right now. So, and then down here, we just set what WQL query we want to execute. And you can just enter in any WQL query as a string into that option. And we're going to go ahead and just do a basic one here. What this says is, give me the name and the status of all services installed on our target. And if we run that, we'll get our results spit back to us in some nice, pretty little tables here. And we can just see this is all of the Windows services running on each of these boxes and what its current status is. And again, you can execute any query you want. You can get the architecture, you can get information about the hardware, installed software, etc. And by default, that information is then stored as loot within the database if you have Metasploit connected to a Postgre database. So that's our WQL query execution. Now let's try running some commands. Same basic setup, except instead of a WQL string, this time we're going to have a command string. And now I just have it set for ipconfig/all because that's a very quick and easy thing to show you that we are in fact running a command easily recognizable on a Windows system and getting the output back. We also have an option here. Saving the output that's returned is optional on the command execution because sometimes you don't care about the output. It's not useful. If you want to save the output you get back from running a command, you just set this option to true and it'll save it as loot the same way the WQL one will. So let's just go ahead and see that in action. And not super exciting, but you know, ta-da, we've run the ipconfig command and see the full output returned back to us. And if there were any errors when running the command, we would also actually get that output returned back to us. So if you munged up the syntax or whatever, you'd actually see it print back the error that the command prompt would issue you. So you could do all kinds of things with this. You know, you could add a new user to the machine to set up some persistence. You could change settings on the box, disable the firewall using the netsh command. I mean, you could turn off antivirus if you really want to get complicated with it. So, you know, that's actually a perfect scenario too. You don't want to send a payload to your target machine yet because you're afraid antivirus will pick it up. Use the WinRM command module to disable the antivirus first, then send your payload and you don't have to worry about it. So that's all good. Let's take a look at the real meat and potatoes though. So we're going to use exploit Windows WinRM, and it's the WinRM script exec module. It's the only exploit under WinRM currently. And we have some just very basic options here. Again, the same things, the domain, username, password. And we also have an option here called force VBS. What this option does is it forces it to that backup. If for any reason you don't want to do the PowerShell, you don't want to try the PowerShell method, you can force it to just use the VB script module. And I actually have the correct payload set here, but I'm going to go ahead and just change this. Whoops, bad autocomplete. Just to demonstrate a point, Windows interpreter first TCP. All right, and we're going to go ahead and exploit on our first victim. And we can see it actually pops up with an error and stops trying to exploit it because it says we selected an x86 payload for an x64 target. So we're going to go ahead and fix that for this machine. Set payload Windows x64 interpreter reverse TCP. Try not to go too long here, sorry. And we'll try it again. So we can see it starts up our handler. It finds PowerShell 2.0. It successfully sets the execution policy to unrestricted and begins uploading our PowerShell payload into the temp directory. Now this will take a minute or two because it's writing out line by line, and each line it has to send another request via SOAP. Now it's executed the script, completed our session, and Smart Migrate has already taken over as our initial auto run script. And it's successfully migrated into process 424. So if we look at get PID, we should see we are on 424, which is, if we look, the Win logon process. That's good. So what if we do get UID? Oh, look at that. We are anti-authority system. And there's just nothing better than being anti-authority system. So let's go ahead and exit that shell. And we're going to switch targets to that other machine. We're going to change our host and point it at 152. And we know that this is a Windows 2000 Server 2003 box, so it's going to be a x86 box. So we're going to change the payload back to a 32-bit version of Meterpreter. And we're going to go ahead and tell it exploit. And we can see, because it's Windows Server 2003, PowerShell is not installed by default. So that check fails, and it falls back to our VBS command stager, which is going to scroll across your screen with this lovely progress update feature. And boom, and sending our stage. And we've already gotten our Meterpreter session, and Smart Migrate is migrating us into a process, which is process 476. As soon as I get my shell back. There is a slight delay there, and the reason that is because we have to actually hang that VB script. We have to basically keep it running just long enough to make sure that we migrate our process out, because otherwise, if the VB script dies, the shell will also die with it, because the executable is being executed as a child process of C script. So it's sort of a similar problem. So we just let VB script hang for a second. And so that can cause a slight delay in getting actual interactivity on our shell. But if we check get PID, we're on 476, which should, of course, be, again, winlogon.exe. And if we look, we are anti-authority system. And just for the sake of argument, hey, there's our hash dump. And that's WinRM. Like I said before, the big thing for this exploit is, of course, when we can use that PowerShell exploit, we absolutely want to, because no antivirus currently picks up those PowerShell payloads. So if we just move on here, anyone who wants to set up WinRM to play with this at home, take a newer version of Windows, like Windows 7, Windows Server 2008, and just run WinRM quick config from an administrator command prompt. Now, by default, the WinRM quick config setup is a little janky. It sets allow unencrypted to false by default, but doesn't set up an HTTPS encrypted listener. So you have two options. You can change that option, allow unencrypted to true, and it will just operate smoothly over HTTP. Or you can configure it to use an HTTPS listener, and then you would just adjust your ports on your module as appropriate. And again, we have a little table here just to show you. On older versions of WinRM, like for Windows XP and Server 2003, WinRM listens to port 80 for HTTP and 443 for HTTPS by default. And on newer versions for WinRM 2.0, for Windows 7, Server 2008, Windows 8, etc., it's ports 5985 and 5986. And that's about it. I will hand the presentership back over to Donald and maybe change presenter and let Donald open it up for Q&A.
Awesome. Let me get back to full screen here. All right, and well, I'll get your feedback. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. So now that you guys can see, not only was that pretty cool, and we did get through some really excellent technical stuff, but before we get into the questions, as David had just mentioned, and as we promised, we do have a special offer. So we thank you for staying through the entire presentation and the demos. But as mentioned earlier, the Ethical Hacker Network has some pretty cool prizes, literally worth thousands of dollars, that we give away each and every month to top contributors in our forums. Some of those prizes include full instructor-led courses, online training, books, hacking hardware. Well, this month, as I mentioned earlier, Rapid7 is also sponsoring the EHNet monthly giveaway. So if you really do follow the example set by David and contribute to a community, and fortunately this one would be our community at EHNet, well, this time it can pay off for you in the form of a full version of Metasploit Pro, which also comes with an entire year of support. Now, talk about generous. This prize with the software and the support that's given by Rapid7 is worth $15,000. Yes, you heard that correct, 15, 15. All you have to do is share your thoughts, your experiences, your technical knowledge, or anything else that grabs you for that matter. If you like helping newcomers to our industry, or posting jobs that you know about or that your company is trying to fill, just go participate on EHNet, and that prize could be yours. But as we mentioned, before you run off to EHNet, let's get into some Q&A. Let's see here. I have a few questions here, and it looks like there's a couple more questions coming up. All right. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Excellent. So as we're moving into the Q&A, you can see that I forwarded the slide to the next one. So all the information that you need to find out about the free monthly giveaway will be on EHNet. Just go there. You can't miss it. But now that we're moving on to the Q&A slide, if you have any additional questions that either don't get answered here or you think about them late, just go join us either on the Ethical Hacker Network, which I will kindly ask David to join us there as well. You'll notice that there's a thread that is associated with the article that announced this webcast today. And there's a little cartoon bubble right near the top of the article. You can just click on that. It'll take you right to the forum discussion. And you can ask David additional questions. Or if you're just the researching type, as most of us techies are, you can go directly to rapid7.com, metasploit.com. You can follow any one of us on Twitter, or just again, because they don't just do everything electronically, they actually do have a sales team. You can call Rapid7 directly. So with that in mind, all right, Monsieur Cosine, is the new WinRM or WinRS functionality also available in the Metasploit Community Edition as well as Metasploit Pro?
So yes, everything that's in Metasploit Framework exists in Metasploit Community and in Express and in Pro. So it sort of bubbles up. So everything that's in Framework is available in those versions. For Metasploit Pro users, what you will see in the near future is these features actually integrated into the Metasploit Pro automation features. So our discovery scan will pick up WinRM services and add that information. The brute forcer will have options for the WinRM service, and the brute forcer will be able to get shells once it gets creds. So you can very quickly you'll be able to very quickly automate it and say, run a discovery scan, then run the brute forcer. When the brute forcer finds those credentials for WinRM, it'll already go ahead and open up a shell for you, and you're already halfway there.
Excellent. Well, you actually touched on a question that a number of our attendees had, is if the script automatically detects whether 32 or 64-bit scripts are wrong, then why not automate it? So can you address that? And I'm sure there are some instances where you may want to actually try a 32-bit script on a 64-bit box, but clearly it won't go the opposite way. But let's just get your thoughts on that if possible.
Okay, so the problems have to do with how PowerShell runs. And so if you're not using the PowerShell method, a 32-bit payload for the VBS command stager will absolutely work on a 64-bit system. So first of all, it's only with that PowerShell method that's an issue. And it has to do with the way the payload is generated at the time the module is run. And I am still looking into a good way to have it auto-correct that payload for us instead of just sending up a warning. It's still something that's being looked at. So, stay tuned for future improvements. Hopefully, instead of spitting back a warning for you in the future, it'll be able to say, oh, well, you selected a 32-bit payload, but this is a 64-bit system, so let me correct that for you.
Okay, while we're at it and we're talking about PowerShell, somebody asked, why is it necessary to drop the PowerShell script to disk?
So under a lot of circumstances, it wouldn't be. PowerShell has this amazing ability to actually execute an entire PowerShell script base 64 encoded as a string given as a command line argument. The problem we ran into is that our payload is just a little too big. Because once you take the PowerShell form of our stager and base 64 encode it so that PowerShell will be able to execute it like that, it ends up being just about 2,000 bytes too big altogether for the Windows command line. Not even for PowerShell, but the Windows command line will not take a command string that large. And so it just ends up being too big, and that's why we had to revert to actually writing the PowerShell script out to disk.
Excellent. Now, you had mentioned that if you can't use the PowerShell 2.0 method, that it defaults down to the VBS executable. But since the VBS executable could be flagged by antivirus, apart from the PowerShell 2.0 method, what are some other ways that you can possibly evade antivirus?
So that's a very complex topic in of itself. There's a lot of things you can do to evade antivirus, and a lot of it actually has to do with the executable template. When Meterpreter itself is very rarely detected in memory. What does get detected all the time are the executable templates we use. That's the actual exe file that holds our actual payload, our actual shellcode, and runs it into memory and executes it for us when we actually have to drop something like that. And those are what often get detected. So there's always the option to use different exe templates in those scenarios, and there's actually advanced options all through the Metasploit framework to roll those custom exe templates in. And there's some other things you can do as well. You could do an entire webcast, honestly, just on that topic. The one common mistake that people make is that they think that payload encoders are there to evade antivirus. That's not what they do. So if please don't come to us and say, well, I ran every encoder I could think of, but antivirus still picked it up. Encoders won't fool antivirus. That's not even what they're designed to do. And stay tuned in the future. Again, these are hot button issues that we're aware of, and we'll hopefully have further improvements over the next couple of months to help deal with those kinds of issues.
Excellent. Now, one thing that you did mention is that on certain topics, you can dedicate entire papers, research, webcasts, interviews, anything you can think of to a given topic, and it could take hours upon hours. So with that being said, I don't know if you have anything off the top of your head, but I figured I'd ask anyway. So we have a lot of those topics that you touched on briefly that really, as a pen tester, you need to go out there and research yourself. Since you were a pen tester in the past, and you're doing a lot of extra research on some of these topics, I was hoping that maybe you did have them at your fingertips. So can you give some quick resources, tutorials, other webcasts or anything where people can get more details on WinRM and WinRS itself, as opposed to them just going out and Googling it themselves? Maybe we can give them a little hand.
Sure. Well, I mean, the biggest resource for me, actually, in a lot of the work I do, believe it or not, is Microsoft's MSDN website. They have, say what you want about Microsoft, they're really, really good these days about documenting things. And the MSDN is just an incredible resource for almost any Microsoft topic you want to find information about. I mean, their whole API is pretty much up there with some exceptions. There's detailed specs and guidelines on WinRM and WinRS on the website, how to configure it, how to use it, what its capabilities are. In addition to that, there's actually some good resources on VMware's forums. For some reason, the VMware community is really big into WinRM and WinRS, and so there's a lot of tutorials and how-tos there. And I believe Carlos Perez actually has done some things on the topic as well. Carlos, also known as Dark Operator. I know he's touched on the topic, at least during his DerbyCon training class when I talked to him. So there are people out there who have a lot of good resources on this particular topic.
Excellent. And I know there's some other questions about NetSH that would kind of follow along with the same answer, whereas Microsoft does provide a huge number of resources, and there are plenty of people out there, because once you get to the point where you can use NetSH, man, is that powerful. You can do just about anything. As you had mentioned during the presentation yourself, you can turn off antivirus. Anything else along with the NetSH tutorials or resources that you can throw out to the audience?
Oh, man, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Part of it is my background before I was even a pen tester was as a technician and ISP technical support. So I've spent just a lot of years picking up, little bits and pieces of information, and that's sort of what you have to do. Is you have to sort of build your own library of useful areas where you happen to know a lot about that subject. And the thing is, nobody is an expert on everything. One of the best feelings in the world to me is when I get to talk to some of my colleagues who've been at this longer than me, and I know something that they need to know, and I get to save the day by having an answer. So, just play around with things, and as you learn to solve specific problems, you'll find that you get to reapply that knowledge over and over again as it comes back up. And always rely on the people around you. The greatest thing about working in InfoSec is that we have the most amazing community of any out there, bar none. Most of the people in this community are so helpful and so willing to share what they know. It's truly fantastic.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I know if you need any command line kung fu stuff, you can just go right to Ed Scotus, and he's unbelievable at it.
That is definitely a good source, yes.
But along those same lines, where you said that it's very interesting because nobody can know everything that you really have to listen to the community. Even some people here, before we get to some more questions, there's actually a couple people that had some statements. So like one person writes, with the right credentials, you can actually connect directly to the machine with the new PS session PowerShell commandlet.
Interesting. I'm not familiar with that functionality, and that's something I'm going to have to write down to take a look at what that might get us.
No problem. In fact, somebody else had mentioned that regardless of the execution policy, you can just run PowerShell.exe with dash encoded command, bypassing the execution policy altogether.
Right, and that's what I was talking about with the command line option, where you actually pass the actual script as a base64 encoded string. And the problem we ran into with that, again, is that the string ended up just being too long. I would ideally have loved to use that technique, because that would have meant we didn't write anything to the file system, and that's an ideal scenario.
Is there anything in the works to try and avoid that pitfall?
I mean, it's something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind. I mean, in the end, the problem is just that the stager for the payload, the PowerShell stager, ends up being too long, and I don't think we can cut that down any more than it already is. We're pretty conscious of the size of our payloads because space is super premium when you're talking about payloads. So we try and keep those as absolutely small and tight as possible.
Oh, you almost stepped into a "that's what she said" comment. Can you connect to WinRM with non-admin privileges?
You absolutely can. What you can do with it will be limited.
Excellent. Now, there's a lot of other questions pertaining to countermeasures. So it's really cool that we can do this, but since we're pen testers and we do this for a living and the end result is that we want to protect our own systems, what are some countermeasures that can be recommended to protect systems from this particular exploit and using the attack method by utilizing Metasploit?
So I mean, at the heart, I mean, it's not a traditional exploit in the sense of it's not a buffer overflow or a format string attack or anything like that. It's leveraging my favorite security flaw, which is weak password policy or predictable passwords, passwords saved places that can be stolen and reused, things like that. So, I mean, the number one thing is to ensure proper password security in your environment. And that means making sure that passwords aren't saved in appropriate places, that passwords follow proper guidelines for length and complexity, rotation, etc. But also, something that very few people do is actually audit password success. What I mean by that is there's a lot of environments, a lot of corporations out there that have monitoring for logon failures. And, oh, you know, this account had 5 logon failures in a row, we raise an alert and it goes to the incident response team. And that's pretty standard these days. That's great. But what very few companies, very few environments have is a setup where they actually monitor for overly aggressive logon successes, right? So it's very obvious, it's very easy to say, oh, if the same account fails to log in 5 times, something may be wrong. But what if the same account logs in successfully onto 5 different machines within a second of each other? That should raise a red flag. A normal person won't really be able to do that. So if you see, or say, even forget 5, 10 boxes, 15, 100, I mean, it gets more obvious the more boxes you see, but if you see in a very short order pretty telling signs that some sort of automated response is going out here where a automated tool is using these credentials and logging into a bunch of boxes all over the place, that should raise red flags too. And in most environments, it doesn't.
Excellent. There's a number of people that are asking about the information that we use today. So, but they asked it in a slightly different manner. So let me try and answer this. First of all, yes, we will have the video posted on EHNet. We usually take about a month just to, again, try and give an advantage to those people who are attending the live event. But some people totally understood that, and they were very complimentary for what we're doing here today. But they said, until we can get the video, will there be a step-by-step guide published by either us or Rapid7?
So there is a blog post on Rapid7's community site, which is called Security Street. It's at community.rapid7.com, I believe, where I talk about each module in turn, much in the way that I did here. It's a little more high level, but it should give you what you need and contains links to the full details of each module. So if you want to go through that blog post, it will help guide you through.
Excellent. In addition to that, we had some people asking if the slide deck was going to be made available before the video is released. I have no problem doing that. It didn't seem like the slides were the highest portion of the presentation today, which was always a good thing. But would you have a problem posting on EHNet a place where they can grab your slide deck?
Not at all. I'd leave that up to you, since you have the policy about waiting a little while for the video. But I'd be happy to provide those slides.
Excellent. Well, why don't you send that to me, and then we'll make sure that we upload that to the Ethical Hacker Network, and I'll post a link to it in the forum thread for the announcement of this webcast. Excellent. We are pretty close to the top of the hour, and we have a few more questions. You mind hanging out for a few more minutes?
No, let's go right for it.
Excellent. Now, there's some questions here, and I'll just, instead of answering them myself, you're our guest here today, so I'll just throw them at you and you answer. Server 2003 does not have PowerShell installed by default. I think I'm doing that inflection correctly. Are you sure? Or are we only specifically looking for PowerShell 2.0?
Well, the answer to both questions is yes. Windows Server 2003, at least not R2, does not install PowerShell by default. Also, now it can be turned on very easily, but it is not there. It is not there by default. And yes, we are only looking for PowerShell 2.0. So that check will still fail if PowerShell 1.0 or 1. Whatever is installed.
Excellent. Had some other questions in regards to the demo. People are asking, hey, that's really cool, but some of us actually, believe it or not, use the GUI. So do you have the ability to go back a step and show us a possible demo using the Metasploit GUI?
Oh, geez. Yes. Tell you what, let me get that starting up, because I don't have it up in place at the moment. Let me get that started up, and we'll take another question while I'm waiting for that to load.
So here's a perfect question to kill some time. Someone out there literally wrote, I'm not kidding, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
American or African?
Exactly. So I had to do it. That's hysterical.
No.
Also while you're doing that, if you could just kind of wax on a little bit about some of the differences between the versions of Metasploit.
Sure. So everybody, of course, should be familiar with Metasploit Framework, which is the basis for all Metasploit products. Beyond that, that comes with the console, or you can run Armitage or MSF GUI or any of those things. Beyond that, we have Metasploit Community Edition, which gives our official web UI interface over top of Metasploit Framework. It doesn't actually add any new back-end features, but provides that UI and that rich user interface experience, which can sort of help you better track the information you're gathering as you go. Then we have the Metasploit Express Edition, Metasploit Express adds some of the advanced features. Trying to remember the difference for Express. So Express has the automation for exploitation. It has our brute forcer and our automated evidence collection.
I also just, pardon me for interrupting for just a second. I also backed up a slide during, for the free monthly giveaway slide. I put some of the small differences between Community, Express, and Pro, if that kind of helps.
Yeah, perfect.
But I thought it might be helpful to jog the memory, as well as you can take this into more of a technical, real-world use kind of scenario in answering that question.
Yeah. So so if you look at this, the smart exploitation is what looks at the host you've selected and says these ports are open. We know that these vulnerabilities exist on these machines, so these are the exploits we're going to throw at these different machines. Password auditing is just automation around those brute force modules like the one we looked at today. Evidence collection is just a fancy way of saying that we have some predefined post-exploitation modules that run in an automated fashion on all of our open sessions. And then we've got some reporting capabilities there. Metasploit Pro is where all the really magical things happen. That's where we have advanced social engineering features, where we have all our web app scanning stuff. We have the ability to do macros for post-exploitation where you custom define, I want this macro to mean run these post-exploit modules in this order. We have the VPN pivot, which is just amazing. It can bridge two interfaces on a victim machine to turn it into a proxy for you, basically. I mean, there's a lot of extra features in here. Some of our new antivirus evasion features in here are in Pro only. The ability to dynamically generate exe templates on the fly. Integration with Nexpose. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's in Pro that's why it's worth that $15,000.
Yeah, and actually that VPN pivoting is pretty cool. We did that in a previous webcast. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
No, I was just mentioning that.
Yeah, if you can give me.
Yeah, I'll give that back to you. I was just mentioning that in a previous webcast that EHNet did with Rapid7, we actually demoed the VPN pivoting, and it was pretty cool. So let me go ahead and I'll change presenter back to you.
Okay. Show my screen. All right, and this says Metasploit Pro, but this will look pretty much the same for Community Edition for what we're doing. And so if we wanted to currently run one of those modules, we'd just go to the module browser. Oh, of course, I just started this up, so it's going to be just a wee bit sluggish the first moment here. Bear with me. Okay. We'll do a search for WinRM. And say we want to do our discovery module. And we're going to point it at our VMs. And it would work basically the same way as you would do in the MSF console. You fill out your options here, and then you just tell it to run the module. And we can see in our task log the results returned to us. And it's the same for any of these modules that you want to run. If you wanted to run the query runner, we can do the same exact thing. Password 3, administrator, and we can run it just the same way that you saw in the demo. It's just all done through this web interface. Where you're going to see changes, again, for Metasploit Pro customers is when you go to do, for example, our discovery scan. There will be automation in the back end that will automatically pick up the WinRM services for us. And if we go into the brute forcer, again, this is a Pro-specific feature. you'll in the near future see a WinRM option here as well. And that will allow you to brute force the WinRM service and automatically open a shell if you successfully get credentials. But aside from that, there should be really no major differences in how you would run these modules between the console and the web interface. The web interface is just going to give you that, that more rich user interface experience.
And it's so pretty.
It is.
This next question actually made me think back. Here, let me go back. You're handing me the presentation again. Made me actually think back to when Microsoft Winternals literally put their tools online for people to use over the internet. So that's what it made me think of. So here's the question. If a system has Windows IIS on port 80 and the administrator enabled WinRM as well, will WinRM be available on the internet?
Yes.
Pretty scary stuff, huh?
Yes, and without going into too much details, and I don't know, I don't know how much I can talk about this, but suffice it to say, someone has pointed out to me several very high-profile examples of where that is the case. And WinRM, if you actually look at those modules again, you'll see that there's a URI option, which we just left on the default the whole time. And that is the default for the WinRM listener, which is /WSMan. Just start taking a look on the internet and see what really big public websites have /WSMan listening for post requests. You might be surprised.
And I think that is an excellent place to end with a little scary news about what people actually do. But you know what? The good thing about all that is somebody out there somewhere thinks that that's a fantastic idea and it makes their life easy. But in the end, it's what keeps us all employed, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So anyway, in closing, let me just say that about does it for our time here today, and I'd like to thank everyone that attended, everyone that asked questions, especially you, sir, for presenting. All of your time is greatly appreciated. And if this type of information is something that interests you and you'd like for us to keep doing more, please contact either one of us at any of the ways that we mentioned that you could contact us, and let us know what you think, how we did, what topics you'd like to see in the future, how you thought the presenter was, and anything that you want to share with us. Please go ahead and do that, because we really do listen and we really do try and help you not only advance your career, but we also try and educate you as well. You can do that, again, at ethicalhacker.net, where you can also stop in for great articles, special offers for EHNetters like discounts on training or book reviews. We also run contests, as well as, again, announcements for future webcasts. So for Mr. Maloney of Rapid7, this is Don, your editor-in-chief of the Ethical Hacker Network, wishing you a great week and an even better career. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.